I was sipping burnt coffee on my porch when the letter arrived, dressed like a threat, heavy paper, heavier arrogance. Move your cabin 20 feet. It read as if my home were patio furniture and not a lifetime of work bolted to bedrock. I've spent decades drawing lines that buildings dare not cross. Now a committee with clipboards said my grandfathered cabin trespassed on their common ground. Funny thing about lines, they keep receipts. Mine live in dusty plats, iron cornerstones, and maps, stamped long before anyone paved a cul-de-sac and called it destiny. I didn't plan a war. But when I unfolded their claim against the morning light, I saw what they didn't. If I followed that line to its honest end, it wouldn't move my cabin, it would move their street. And if they wanted a lesson in boundaries, I was ready to teach it with a ruler made of law. Before we dive in, drop your city and local time in the comments, and if you love HOA drama served with receipts, hit subscribe so you don't miss the twist. When you've built skyscrapers, you stop fearing letters, or at least I thought I had. The day that envelope showed up, I was fixing the porch railing, the same one my uncle built in 1963 when the lake was still raw and wild. It was mid-October, a soft gray light hanging over Granite Lake when I spotted its stiff cream-colored paper wedged in my rusted mailbox, embossed with a crest I already hated before I read it. Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. They always find a way to sound important, like a fake government stitched together from gossip and bylaws. I tore it open anyway. Inside, a 3-page sermon of bureaucratic confidence. After review of boundary compliance, your structure has been found to encroach upon common area land belonging to the association. You are hereby required to relocate your dwelling no less than 20 feet east to meet community standards. 20 feet. As if my cabin were a picnic table I could drag across the dirt. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the punchline. But it was signed boldly in fountain pen by Nora Voss, HOA president, who apparently believed that every nail in this valley owed her allegiance. I almost laughed. My property predated Lakeside Meadows by half a century. My uncle built this cabin before the HOA existed, before their bylaws, before their so-called common area even had pavement. Still, I felt that old familiar pulse in my temple, the one I used to get in boardrooms when a client tried to reinterpret the laws of physics to fit their budget. I knew exactly what kind of people I was dealing with, the kind who mistake rules for power and power for righteousness. I went inside, poured coffee that had long since gone cold, and unlocked the oak cabinet by the fireplace. Inside sat my fortress, a thick leather binder, edges worn smooth from decades of work. Every deed, plat, title, and survey since 1949. I flipped through them like an old priest reading scripture. Lot 27B, unincorporated. Boundaries recorded in county archives. The cabin's coordinates stamped and notarized before Nora Voss ever bought her first lawn chair. But arrogance has a gravity of its own. By the time I finished my second cup, I could feel it pulling me in, the absurdity, the nerve, the sheer insult of it all. Still, a part of me hesitated. Maybe it was a clerical mistake. Maybe some rookie surveyor misplaced a decimal, so I called the HOA office. After 10 minutes of press 1 for compliance, I reached a man whose tone was equal parts politeness and poison. "Mr. Ward," he said, "our records are clear. Your structure sits approximately 18 to 20 feet into HOA land." "Your records?" I asked. "Which records exactly? Because I have county maps that disagree." "If you wish to contest," he replied, "you may submit a review request to our legal committee. However, failure to comply before the deadline may result in cumulative fines and forced removal proceedings." I could hear the smile in his voice. Not a human smile, a bureaucrat's smirk, the kind that knows time and red tape are weapons sharper than knives. I hung up heart-thudding and stepped outside. The lake shimmered like brushed silver beneath the afternoon sun, the air clean and cool. To the east, a row of near-identical houses stood along what used to be forest. The HOA called it Birch Avenue. My uncle used to call it the Deer Trail. It wasn't lost on me that those identical homes, each with its imported turf and vinyl fences, stood awfully close to my property line. That night I couldn't sleep. The letter sat on my kitchen table, bathed in orange light from the fireplace. I thought of the clients I'd seen weaponize zoning laws, the city inspectors who'd trade integrity for a steak dinner. This was the same playbook, only smaller, pettier, but small battles can still burn. By morning my calm had calcified into resolve. I wasn't going to move my cabin an inch. Instead, I decided to do what I'd always done best, measure twice, and let truth do the cutting. I spent the next 3 days combing through every map and record I had. The more I studied, the more something gnawed at me. A subtle mismatch: the HOA's common boundary ran about 6 yards deeper into my land than the county's official parcel record. 6 yards might not mean much to most people, but to a man who'd spent 30 years drafting blueprints, it screamed. So I hired a surveyor. Not just any surveyor, Glenwood Land Services, a small family firm that had mapped half of northern Michigan since the 1932nd. When they arrived with laser tripods and orange flags, I watched from the porch, hands in my pockets, as they crisscrossed the property line like a choreography of truth. It took 3 days. On the fourth morning, Glenwood's lead, an older man named Frank, returned with a binder and a nervous half-smile. "Mr. Ward," he said, tapping the first page, "you were right about the 1,950 boundary markers. That granite cornerstone is still in place." "And the line?" I asked. He hesitated. "Sir, not only is your cabin well within your property, but the HOA's paved road and 6 houses along Birch Avenue sit 5 to 10 feet into your land." For a long second I said nothing. The air felt still like before a thunderstorm. I stared at the map, tracing the red and black lines that told a story no committee meeting could erase. My cabin hadn't trespassed. They had. I leaned back and laughed, a quiet, disbelieving laugh that startled even me, because suddenly the absurdity of their letter became something else entirely: leverage. That night I sat by the fire with both letters, their demand, and Frank's report laid side by side. The irony was too perfect. They wanted me to move my cabin 20 feet east. Fine. Let's see how they planned to move their street 5 feet west. But beneath the satisfaction, a chill crept in. I knew how people like Nora operated. They wouldn't apologize. They'd retaliate. They'd bury me in paperwork, drag my name through neighborhood meetings, make every trip to the grocery store a gauntlet of glares. I'd seen this power game before, only this time it wasn't in a city boardroom. It was on my land. So I wrote my own letter, calm, concise, lethal in its politeness. "Dear Miss Voss, thank you for your notice regarding alleged encroachment. Following an independent survey by Glenwood Land Services, I must inform you that your association's paved road and multiple residential structures currently occupy approximately 0.17 acres of my property. Please advise on a suitable timeline for their relocation." I signed it with a flourish and dropped it in the outgoing mail. Then I went back to stacking firewood, whistling like a man who'd just set a trap baited with facts. The following week, the HOA meeting notice appeared on the community bulletin board: mandatory attendance, property boundary clarification discussion. I didn't plan on attending, but sometimes justice needs an audience. So I ironed my old flannel shirt, tucked Glenwood's report under my arm, and walked into the lion's den with the calm of a man holding dynamite under his coat. Because one thing I'd learned after years of drafting lines was this: when you challenge power built on lies, the first crack always starts with a map. And tonight I was about to draw it for everyone to see. The night before the HOA meeting, I spread every piece of evidence across my dining table like I was preparing for trial, which in a way I was. Maps yellowed with time, photocopied deeds, the Glenwood survey report, aerial photos from the county GIS website. My cabin sat cleanly within my property like a soldier at attention, but the HOA's Birch Avenue sliced straight through my parcel line like an invading army. It wasn't a matter of inches, it was yards. As the fire crackled behind me, I caught myself smirking at how poetic it all was. They had written me a letter demanding I move 20 feet east. In truth, their entire neighborhood needed to move 50 feet west. I should have slept soundly that night, but experience told me the truth alone rarely wins. I'd seen men with forged permits outlast honest builders because they had deeper pockets and louder voices. The next morning, I tucked the binder under my arm, stepped into the brisk Michigan air, and drove down to the county assessor's office. The clerk, a woman with horn-rimmed glasses and a smile too tired to care, barely looked up when I explained my situation. But when I laid out my documents, her expression changed. "Well, you're not wrong," she said, flipping through the survey. "Your parcel's been grandfathered since 1951. HOA has no recorded jurisdiction over it." "Then how can they demand I move?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because they can write letters faster than we can file lawsuits." That line stuck with me. Bureaucracy's greatest weapon is time. You drown before the system even admits you're in the water. I asked for copies of the original subdivision plats from when Lakeside Meadows was first filed. She printed 3 sets of records dated 1998-2003 and 2006. On the earliest one, the boundary between my parcel and the development was clean, but on the later maps, the line had somehow drifted 6 to 10 feet south. Someone had redrawn reality with a pen stroke. I thanked her and left my binder now twice as heavy and 3 times as dangerous. When I returned to the cabin, I fired up my old laptop, loaded the county GIS overlay, and imported Glenwood's drone measurements. The red grid appeared over the satellite image, like a laser tattoo, revealing the truth in sharp pixels. 6 homes, numbers 12 through 22 Birch Avenue, sat partly on my property. Driveways, gardens, even one section of the road itself cut into my parcel like a knife through pie crust. That's when I noticed something odd in the metadata of the 2006 plat. The surveyor of record was listed as Voss Land and Title, the same last name as the HOA president Nora. A coincidence? Maybe. But HOA Karens rarely believe in coincidence. They believe in control. The more I looked, the more the story unfolded. The adjusted plat had been filed just a month before construction on Birch Avenue began. A family company tweaks the map, the HOA builds a road, and 15 years later they send me a letter claiming I'm the one trespassing. It wasn't just arrogance, it was theft dressed in legal stationery. By late afternoon, I drove into town to make copies at the post office. While waiting, a neighbor I barely knew, Elliot Sanders' house number 18, approached. He wore that uneasy half-smile people give when they want to seem friendly but are fishing for information. "Hey, Ethan," he said. "Saw your name on the meeting notice. Everything okay?" "Just a misunderstanding," I replied, sliding the binder under my arm. He hesitated. "Well, people are talking. They say your cabin might be sitting on HOA land." I chuckled. "Oh, they're half right. Somebody's home is on someone else's land, it just isn't mine." He frowned, clearly confused, and wandered off. Word spreads fast in small communities. By the time I got home, I could already feel the shift in the air, curt waves from passing cars, side glances at the general store. The HOA rumor mill had started grinding, and I was the grain. That evening, the lake reflected the sunset like molten copper. I stood at the edge of the water, binder in hand, and felt the weight of solitude pressing on my chest. Fighting a committee isn't just about proving facts, it's about surviving whispers. Once a neighborhood decides you're the villain, truth becomes optional. Still, I wasn't alone. The land was with me. Every cedar post, every granite cornerstone, every inch of soil under my boots had history. My uncle built this cabin before zoning codes, before bylaws, before people started thinking they could fence off nature with paperwork. If the HOA wanted a war of documents, I would fight it, with the oldest weapon known to man, evidence carved in stone. The next morning, Glenwood surveyor Frank stopped by unexpectedly. He looked uneasy. "Mr. Ward," he said, "someone from the HOA office called our company this morning, asked for access to our field notes and drone data. Did you give it to them?" "Of course not. But it's clear they're rattled. They know you've got them cornered." I smiled. Then they're about to get an invitation. I spent the rest of the day assembling what I called the presentation. Old plats, Glenwood's certified report photos of the granite boundary marker with my uncle's initials carved faintly on its face. I printed everything twice, one set for myself, one for public display. That evening, I arrived early to the HOA meeting. It was held in a community hall that used to be a church before someone paved over the steeple. Folding chairs in neat rows, a coffee urn already brewing bitterness in the corner. Nora Voss stood near the podium, red blazer, perfectly pressed, the kind of woman who treated a clipboard like a weapon. "Mr. Ward," she greeted, her smile so tight it could cut glass. "Glad you could join us. I assume this is about your misunderstanding." "Oh, I think we'll clear it up tonight," I replied, setting my binder on the front table. As residents trickled in, I felt the room's curiosity pulse like static. People whispered behind cupped hands. By the time Nora banged her gavel, every seat was filled. "We're here," she began to address the recent boundary issue involving Mr. Ward's structure, which appears to extend onto HOA-maintained property. I waited until she finished, then stood slowly, letting silence hang just long enough to taste the tension. "With respect," I said, "my structure isn't the one in violation. These are." I laid out the maps one by one, the county plat, the Glenwood survey, the drone overlay. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the red boundary line revealed what the HOA's map conveniently hid: the street, the driveways, even parts of certain backyards, all falling squarely onto my parcel. Nora's face flushed crimson. "That's absurd. These maps, these aren't official." I tapped the Glenwood seal at the bottom of the report. "Certified by the Michigan Board of Surveying, filed with the county clerk last week. You can verify it yourself." Whispers spread like wildfire. A man in the back asked, "Does that mean our houses are on his land?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The panic answered for me. Nora tried to regain control, fumbling through papers, muttering about pending verification. But the air had changed. The authority she'd wielded like a scepter was cracking. I could almost hear it splinter. When the meeting adjourned, I didn't stay for applause. There was none anyway. I packed my binder, nodded politely, and left through the side door. Outside the night smelled of lake water and smoke heavy and electric. As I walked home under the streetlights, I caught sight of a cluster of neighbors whispering by their mailboxes. One of them, Elliot, looked pale. The illusion had begun to crumble. By the time I reached my porch, headlights swept across the trees. A dark SUV idled for a few seconds before rolling away. HOA reconnaissance, no doubt. I smiled to myself. They could watch all they wanted. The map was public record now. And tomorrow, when the county confirmed every inch of it, Nora Voss would learn the one truth: every self-appointed queen eventually forgets. You can rule a neighborhood but not someone else's land. The morning after the meeting, I expected a letter of apology, or at least a stunned silence. What I got instead was a war declaration wrapped in legal stationery. The HOA sent a notice of continued non-compliance, claiming my presentation was misleading, my survey was invalid, and that unauthorized aerial photography, yes, they called my drone footage, that violated HOA privacy expectations. That line alone made me laugh so hard I spilled my coffee. Privacy expectations, from the same people who pointed cameras at every mailbox like they were auditioning for Big Brother Suburban Edition. Still, laughter has a short shelf life when you're fighting bureaucrats. By noon, 3 neighbors had knocked on my door each, pretending to check in, each really sniffing for information. One of them, a retired dentist named Marvin, whispered, "I heard the HOA's hiring their own surveyor. They're saying your cabin's on environmentally protected ground." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, that ground's been under my boots for 50 years. I must be the ecosystem." He smiled weakly and left, clearly torn between curiosity and fear of being seen talking to me. That's how HOA power works. It doesn't need to be lawful, just loud enough that people start policing themselves. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. When I answered, a cold-clipped voice said, "Mr. Ward, this is Attorney Leah Henders representing the Lakeside Meadows Board. We request you cease public dissemination of unverified boundary data or risk civil penalties for defamation." "Defamation," I repeated. "You can't defame a map." Her silence crackled through the line. "We'll see you at the formal review." They'd set a date 10 days away, a Friday. The HOA loved Fridays. People are tired, offices close early, and outrage is cheaper before the weekend. That evening, I walked the perimeter of my land flashlight, cutting through the fog. My boots found the granite cornerstone half buried under pine needles, its chiseled initials JW, my uncle's mark. 50 years still solid. I brushed it clean with my glove. "Don't worry, old man," I murmured. "They won't move this, and they sure as hell won't move me." The hearing was held in the same hall as the previous meeting, but the energy had changed. The folding chairs were gone, replaced by a long table lined with HOA board members. At the center sat Nora Voss, every hair lacquered into submission, flanked by their newly hired attorney Leah, the woman with the voice like a scalpel. Residents packed the back rows, buzzing with gossip. I could feel their eyes, half pity, half morbid curiosity. I set my binder on the table with a heavy thud. Nora struck the gavel. "We're here to resolve a boundary violation brought to our attention by the Compliance Committee." "Correction," I said calmly. "A false boundary violation." Her eyes flickered. "Mr. Ward, you'll have time for statements after the board presentation." The first speaker was a young man in a blue suit, their official surveyor. He rolled out a glossy map with freshly drawn lines, conveniently excluding my evidence. He spoke in jargon, pointing with a laser pen like a magician, distracting the audience before the trick. Based on updated GIS calibration, he said, "Mr. Ward's cabin sits approximately 18.6 feet within HOA, common easement." "Updated," I interrupted. "Which update? Would that be the one filed in 2006 by your president's family firm?" The room murmured. Nora's smile froze, but she waved her hand dismissively. "Let's keep this professional." "Happy to," I said, sliding a document across the table. "This is the 1951 county plat, certified by the Department of Natural Resources. This," I held up another sheet, "is your subdivision map from 1998. And this last one from 2006 mysteriously moves the line 10 feet south after your road was paved. 3 maps, same land. Only one tells the truth. You decide which." I stepped aside so everyone could see the overlap. Even from the back row, the discrepancy was obvious. The HOA's street cut straight through my parcel like an asphalt scar. Leah leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Mr. Ward, do you have any proof these plats were filed legally?" "Every single one," I said, sliding a sealed copy of the county clerk's letter toward her. "You'll notice the 2006 filing lists, Voss land and title, as surveyor of record." Gasps erupted. Someone in the back muttered, Is that even legal? Nora's jaw tightened. That was my late husband's company, she snapped. Irrelevant. On the contrary, I said softly, it's the definition of relevant. You changed the map built on my land, then demanded I move. That's not regulation, Miss Voss. That's land theft with paperwork. A few people clapped. Not many, but enough to shift the air. Leah stood quickly. Let's not turn this into theater. Then stop writing scripts, I shot back. The crowd laughed. Even the board members looked uneasy. Nora banged the gavel again, but the sound was hollow. Her control was slipping, visible, tangible. The following morning, the gossip had gone nuclear. The local Facebook group, Lakeside Chatter, was flooded with threads HOA built on private land. Did Nora rig the survey? What happens to our mortgages? By lunch, I received 20 friend requests and a voicemail from a local journalist. I ignored them all. I wasn't interested in fame. I wanted the truth on record in ink that even Nora couldn't erase. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse and filed a quiet title action, a legal claim to officially clarify ownership boundaries and void any false encroachments. The clerk, a man with the expression of someone allergic to drama, stamped it reluctantly. HOA cases, he muttered. Always the nastiest kind. He wasn't wrong. When I returned home, I noticed new stakes hammered into the ground near the tree line, bright orange, fresh paint. Someone had been there during my absence. The stakes aligned with the HOA's fake boundary line, not the real one. I pulled each one out, snapped them in half, and tossed them into the fire pit. That night, I found a note pinned to my porch door with a pushpin. You don't know who you're messing with. Move the cabin or you'll regret it. No signature. Just ink pressed hard enough to dent the paper. I didn't sleep much. The forest creaked with wind, but every sound felt personal now. Paranoia is an exhausting roommate. Still, I refused to call the police. Not yet. I wasn't going to hand them a chance to label me the unstable old man at the lake. Instead, I installed motion lights and a cheap trail cam facing the driveway. If they wanted to play shadows, I'd light them up. 3 days later, the official HOA statement arrived, 4 pages of legal acrobatics, claiming Mr. Ward's allegations have caused significant distress and confusion among residents, and that pending legal review, he is hereby instructed to refrain from public commentary. Translation: shut up before people start believing you. But it was too late. The truth had legs. At the local diner, 2 men at the counter whispered my name. At the post office, a woman who used to avoid eye contact leaned over and whispered, I hope you win. The tide was turning. Fear is contagious, but so is courage, when someone finally draws a line and dares to say, this far, no further. The next HOA meeting was chaos before it even began. Half the neighborhood showed up, many demanding to know whether their houses were technically sitting on stolen land. Nora tried to maintain order, but questions flew like hailstones. Will our titles be void? Who pays for the mistake? Did you falsify those maps, Nora? Her polished smile cracked. Everyone calm down. We're waiting for legal clarification. I raised my hand not to speak, just to hold up one page. An email printout from the county assessor confirming the Glenwood survey as valid and binding. The noise died instantly. Nora froze. Leah leaned in to whisper something, but it was too late. The damage was done. Authority, once questioned publicly, rarely survives the night. I walked out quietly while the shouting grew behind me. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the lake glittering under the moon like broken glass. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The battle wasn't over, far from it, but the first crack had widened. The HOA's empire was wobbling, and all I had done was hold up a mirror. Because that's the funny thing about bullies in suits, they can only control you as long as you believe they're bigger than the truth. And now the truth was louder than their gavel. If you've never fought a homeowners association, you might think the battle ends when you prove them wrong. You'd be mistaken. The real war begins when they realize you won't fold. That's when the rules vanish and the shadows get loud. Within a week of that disastrous meeting, Lakeside Meadows HOA transformed from a petty committee into a full-blown smear machine. Their first strike wasn't legal, it was psychological. Suddenly my mailbox filled with letters, not from lawyers, but from concerned neighbors. Each note carried the same tone of feigned civility, the kind that dripped poison beneath the politeness. Ethan, perhaps you don't understand how serious this is for all of us. We just want to live in peace. Why are you stirring trouble? People are starting to talk. Maybe it's time to move on. They signed with first names only, some not even legible. I tossed them into a shoebox and labeled it evidence of cowardice. Then came the fines. Not from any court, no, those were HOA administrative penalties. $100 for non-compliance with boundary regulations. $75 for improper waste bin placement. $50 for unauthorized lighting visible from the street. My so-called offenses had multiplied overnight. It was almost impressive. Bureaucracy can reinvent reality faster than an artist paints a lie. At first I ignored them. Then came the certified letters with tracking numbers. Each envelope thicker, each fine doubled for continued defiance. By the fourth week, their fictional ledger claimed I owed nearly $2,800. I drove to the post office, mailed back each notice stamped with a single word in red ink, rejected. When that didn't break me, they shifted tactics again. It began with a sanitation complaint. A county inspector showed up one morning claiming someone had reported my improper disposal of construction materials. He looked almost embarrassed holding the clipboard. "I just have to check, sir," he said. "Says you've been dumping chemical waste near the lake." I laughed. "Chemical waste? The most dangerous thing on my property is black coffee." He glanced around the neatly stacked firewood, the spotless yard, the compost bin I'd maintained for years. I figured, he said with a sigh. "Sorry, Mr. Ward. They file these under anonymous complaints. We have to follow up." He left after 5 minutes, muttering something about HOA folks with too much time. But the message was clear. They weren't fighting with truth anymore, they were fighting with exhaustion. If they couldn't move me legally, they'd drown me in nuisance. The following week, a new surprise awaited: a public safety notice taped to the community bulletin board warning residents that certain individuals were creating hostility and potentially endangering neighborhood unity. No names mentioned, but the grainy photo printed underneath was me taken from the last meeting. Someone had zoomed in, catching me mid-sentence, mouth open, expression sharp. They'd chosen the angle carefully, half a second frozen into a villain. I tore it down. By dusk, 2 more appeared. The social isolation arrived next. Slow and surgical. Neighbors who once waved stopped mid-gesture. Conversations at the diner halted when I entered. The same people who'd begged for my blueprints when renovating their decks now acted as if eye contact might get them fined. It didn't take long for the rumors to sprout like mold. "He's suing everyone. He wants the whole street demolished. He's planning to sell the land to developers." None of it true, but truth is slow and gossip runs on gasoline. I caught snippets at the grocery store. "My husband says he's dangerous. Didn't he used to work for the government? They say he carries a gun." Let them talk. I didn't own a gun, I owned something worse: documentation. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. You can armor your mind all you want, but solitude cuts deeper when it's forced on you. Nights grew quieter, lonelier. The sound of crickets outside felt like static. Even the lake seemed colder, its reflection fractured by wind. Then came the physical games. One morning I stepped outside to find my mailbox pried open door bent like it had been kicked. Inside was a single scrap of paper: "Pay what you owe." Thick black marker, shaky handwriting. I reported it to the local sheriff's office. The deputy, barely 30, looked apologetic but useless. "Hard to trace, Mr. Ward," he said, scratching his neck. "Could be kids, could be anyone." "Kids don't file legal threats," I replied. He sighed. "We'll file a report. That's about all we can do." Translation: "You're on your own." That night I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. When I looked through the window, a black SUV idled near the road, headlights off. It lingered for a full minute before gliding away. The next morning I found fresh tire tracks near my property line, the fake one, the HOA's fabricated boundary. They'd been there during the night, driving right up to the edge of my trees, marking territory like animals. I took photos. Time, stamps, angles, everything. If they wanted to escalate, I'd make sure every step was recorded. By the 3rd month, their campaign reached a new level: sabotage through bureaucracy. I began receiving utility errors, false water bills, duplicate property tax statements, even a county sanitation invoice for additional waste pickup I'd never requested. Each error forced me to spend hours on hold, listening to the same cheery recordings about community partnership. One afternoon, I stopped by the county records office to clarify a tax discrepancy. The clerk frowned as she checked her screen. "Mr. Ward, someone filed an update to your parcel boundary last week." I froze. "An update? Who authorized it?" She turned the monitor toward me. "The requester, Lakeside Meadows HOA Incorporated." I laughed, a short, humorless sound that made her flinch. "That's illegal," I said. She nodded. "Which is why I flagged it. But they're persistent." Persistent. That was one word for it. Parasites are persistent too. I went home that evening and poured myself a drink for the first time in months. Bourbon neat. I stared at the map on the wall, the original plat framed above the fireplace. My uncle's land, my inheritance, my responsibility. Every time I thought about selling, the thought curdled in my chest. Selling would mean surrendering to the very system that punished honesty. So I fought back the only way I knew how, by building a stronger case. I spent weeks combing through public archives, scanning microfilm at the courthouse, emailing anyone who'd touched the subdivision filings 20 years ago. Eventually, a retired county surveyor named Harold Sloan responded. "I remember that mess," he wrote. "They fast-tracked Lakeside Meadows back in '06. I raised questions about the boundary drift. My supervisor told me to drop it. Said the developer had friends upstairs. I still have the original notes." The next morning he faxed over copies, handwritten measurements, field coordinates, and a memo dated the 18th of May, 2006. Section corner marker found 12 feet north of proposed subdivision boundary. Discrepancy unresolved per developer instruction. There it was, the smoking gun. I scanned everything, backed it up in 3 separate drives, and printed hard copies for court. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was proving the entire neighborhood had been built on a lie, and the HOA knew it. But they weren't done yet. 2 nights later, I came home from town to find my front gate unlatched. At first, I thought I'd simply forgotten to close it. Then I saw the footprints, 2 distinct pairs, one large, one smaller, leading from the driveway toward the porch. Nothing was stolen, but on my porch table sat a single item, a red folder labeled "Final Warning." Inside were photocopies of all their fines, each one stamped "Overdue," plus a handwritten note, "This is your last chance to comply before escalation." No signature, no logo, just the echo of threat wrapped in civility. I sat down on the steps, folder in hand, and looked out at the black mirror of the lake. They thought they could scare me, but they'd just proven something else entirely. They were terrified. Because fear is the last weapon of the guilty, and I was finally close enough to smell it. The next morning I called my lawyer. It was time to stop reacting and start attacking. By the time my lawyer, Colin Hayes, drove up the long gravel road to my cabin, the lake was a mirror of gray steel, and dead leaves floated along the shoreline like tired soldiers. He was a small man with quick eyes and a voice that never rose above calm authority, the kind of man who could quote case law while tying his shoes. He stepped out of his sedan, surveyed the quiet property, and nodded approvingly. "Beautiful spot to start a war," he said dryly. "War's already started," I replied, handing him the folder of HOA letters and Harold's memo from 2006. "I just need to end it before they bury me under paperwork." He sat at my kitchen table, flipping through each document, making soft humming noises like a mechanic diagnosing an engine. When he finished, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said the words that made my shoulders finally drop with relief. They overplayed their hand. "Explain," I said. "See this?" He tapped the memo from the retired surveyor. "That's evidence of willful boundary alteration. They knew about the discrepancy and built anyway. If we file a quiet title action with a motion for a temporary restraining order, we can freeze all HOA enforcement until the court clarifies ownership. They can't fine, you can't harass, you can't even send another notice without violating the order." I smiled. "Sounds expensive for them." He grinned. "Justice usually is." We filed the paperwork 2 days later at the Oak Ridge County Courthouse. The petition wasn't flashy, it was 12 pages of calm, methodical demolition. We cited MCL 600.2932 Michigan statute for quiet title disputes and included the Glenwood survey, the 1,951 plat Harold's memo, and every threatening letter the HOA had ever sent. The stack of exhibits looked like a novel no one wanted to read because every page hurt someone's reputation. Colin also added a TRO motion, temporary restraining order, seeking to halt all HOA enforcement activity, fines, or property entries pending judicial review. The judge on rotation, Honorable Valerie Griggs, had a reputation for disliking HOA drama. She once told a condo board to stop acting like mini-monarchs. Colin said, smirking, "I think we'll get a fair hearing." The motion was granted within 48 hours. Just like that, the HOA's power evaporated overnight. They couldn't touch me, not legally, not financially. But I knew that kind of humiliation doesn't die quietly. The morning after the TRO was served, I found Nora Voss standing at the end of my driveway, wrapped in her red blazer-like armor. Her Lexus idled behind her, hazard lights blinking. "Morning," I said, walking down with my coffee. "If you're here to serve another fine, you'll need to speak with the court first." Her jaw tightened. "You think this little stunt changes anything? You've turned the entire neighborhood against you." I sipped my coffee. "I didn't turn them. You just forgot they could read." She stepped closer, voice dropping into a hiss. "You're destroying property values. Do you know how much this will cost us? The board, the homeowners, everyone. Then you should have thought about that before paving your road over someone else's land. Her face reddened. You're not going to win. You can't fight a community. I gave her a slow smile. Who said I'm fighting a community? I'm fighting you. The rest of them are collateral truth. She blinked momentarily speechless. You're insane, she muttered, turning on her heel. The Lexus door slammed like a gunshot, gravel spraying as she sped away. I didn't shout after her. I just whispered to myself, and you're losing. That afternoon, Colin called with an update. We got their response filing. They're panicking. Their lawyer's trying to argue that your cabin sits within an implied easement zone. Meaning they just admitted there's no legal record of the land belonging to them, he said, chuckling. They're trying to invent rights out of convenience. He paused, flipping through papers. Also, interestingly, they requested the court to seal certain subdivision records, citing privacy. That's not going to fly. What does it mean? It means, he said, we've cornered them so badly they're trying to hide the evidence of their own fraud. Congratulations, Ethan. You've officially become their worst nightmare, a homeowner who reads. The TRO hearing drew half the town. Word had spread faster than wildfire on social media, HOA president facing land fraud allegations. Some came out of curiosity, others came because they realized the outcome might decide whether their mortgage was on solid ground or someone else's. Inside the courtroom, Judge Griggs presided from a bench lined with case files stacked like battlements. Colin opened with quiet precision. Your Honor, this isn't merely a dispute over 20 feet of dirt. This is about the integrity of property ownership itself. The defendant, Lakeside Meadows HOA, knowingly redrew a boundary line to facilitate development. My client's cabin predates their existence by decades. Their demand that he move his home is both baseless and retaliatory. He passed up the Glenwood Survey Herald's memo and a copy of the county's confirmation letter. The judge scanned them, brow furrowing. I see, she murmured. And Miss Henders, how does your client explain this 2006 memo? Leah, the HOA's lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, that document was never officially filed. Its authenticity, Griggs cut her off. It's signed by a licensed surveyor and time-stamped with a county seal. That's authenticity enough. Continue. The room tensed. Nora sat in the front row, fingers gripping her purse like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Colin delivered the final blow with the composure of a surgeon. Your Honor, we are requesting immediate injunctive relief to prevent further harassment pending final resolution of title. The association's conduct, false fines, intimidation, and unauthorized map filings warrants judicial protection. The judge leaned back, then nodded. Motion granted. TRO stands. The HOA is hereby prohibited from contacting, fining, or interfering with Mr. Ward or his property until this matter concludes. The gavel dropped. Bang. It was the sound of oxygen leaving Nora's lungs. Outside the courthouse, residents clustered in small, anxious knots. I caught fragments of conversation as I passed. She knew about the maps. My house is number 16. What if it's on his land? They can't do that, can they? For years, Nora had been untouchable. One gavel strike, and the empire cracked. As Colin loaded his briefcase into the car, I asked, "What's next?" "Discovery," he said. "We'll subpoena every record, every email, every meeting note. If there's a cover-up, we'll find it, and when we do, we'll ask the court for damages." "Damages?" He grinned. "They harassed you for months, vandalized your property, tried to ruin your reputation. You'll be entitled to restitution, maybe even punitive." For the first time since this all began, I let myself breathe. Not smile, just breathe. The kind of deep, honest breath that doesn't carry fear. That evening, the lake was still. No SUVs idled at the road, no letters in the mailbox, just silence. For once, it didn't feel empty, it felt earned. I sat by the fire, flipping through the binder that had become my shield. Every page told a story of arrogance meeting consequence. I thought about my uncle, about the nights we'd sat right here roasting fish and arguing about whether truth ever really wins. Sometimes he'd said truth doesn't win by being louder, it wins by surviving longer. I finally understood what he meant. Because the HOA had volume, but I had endurance. And endurance always outlasts noise. The next morning, Colin called again. Quick update. Judge Griggs just ordered a full review of the HOA's incorporation documents. If any property within the subdivision was illegally annexed, the entire HOA could lose jurisdiction over multiple parcels, including potentially their main road. I almost dropped my coffee. Their road? Yup, Birch Avenue, the one they paved across your land. A slow smile crept across my face. You're saying I could technically charge them for using my driveway? He laughed. If the court rules in your favor, you could build a toll gate and make them pay every morning. Legally, I leaned back in my chair watching sunlight ripple across the lake. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, quiet laugh. Because justice wasn't just on the horizon, it was building momentum. And if the HOA wanted a fight over boundaries, I'd make sure they learned what a real line looked like. The day of the formal hearing felt like the last act of a courtroom thriller no one believed would ever make it to production. The parking lot outside the Oak Ridge County Courthouse was overflowing. Pickup trucks lined the road, reporters milled around holding cameras they pretended not to aim at me, and residents whispered in tight clusters like nervous jurors who'd already picked sides. When I stepped out of my truck, every head turned. I wasn't wearing a suit, just a navy shirt sleeves rolled up and my binder under one arm like scripture. Colin followed behind me carrying the thicker court file. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. Been ready since the first fine. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. The HOA board filled one side of the aisle, Nora Voss at the center, flanked by two silent board members who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Their attorney, Leah Henders, adjusted her pearl earrings and gave me a glance that was equal parts pity and warning. Judge Griggs entered the room, rose, and when we sat again, the air was so tight you could hear the clock ticking behind her bench. Leah stood first, voice sharp but trembling at the edges. "Your Honor, the association maintains that Mr. Ward's cabin, while historically significant, extends 18 feet into property, legally designated as a community easement. Furthermore, Mr. Ward's repeated public accusations have caused measurable distress and financial harm to dozens of residents." Griggs held up a hand. "Counselor, the court is not a PR platform. Stick to evidence." Leah swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. The association's hired surveyor will demonstrate—" "That won't be necessary," the judge interrupted, tapping the Glenwood survey already in front of her. "This independent survey is certified, filed, and corroborated by county archives. Unless you have contradictory data older than 1951, your argument is irrelevant." The silence that followed was almost kind. Nora's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Her world, one built on signatures and bylaws, was cracking. Then it was our turn. Colin rose slowly, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, my client has endured 9 months of harassment, vandalism, and bureaucratic sabotage because an HOA board chose arrogance over accuracy. The evidence is simple. This cabin was built in 1951 on land legally recorded to the Ward family. The HOA, incorporated in 1998, redrew boundary maps in 2006 to accommodate road construction. That redraw was never approved by county surveyors and directly violates Michigan Compiled Law Section 54. 201, tampering with official survey monuments." He laid out the documents in sequence like dominoes: Harold Sloan's memo, the Glenwood report, the county confirmation letter, the TRO ruling. Each page landed with the soft, satisfying thud of inevitability. Colin continued, "We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for recognition that a committee of neighbors has no jurisdiction over property they don't own. Mr. Ward's only crime is refusing to bow to people who confuse authority with ownership." The judge looked down at me. "Mr. Ward, do you wish to make a personal statement?" I stood heart steady. "Only this, Your Honor. When my uncle built that cabin, this wasn't a subdivision. It was wilderness. He marked the boundaries with granite stones so solid they'd outlive both of us. Those stones are still there. What changed isn't the land, it's the people who forgot what boundaries mean." I paused. "The HOA calls it an easement. I call it theft by paperwork." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The judge's expression softened just a flicker, but I saw it. When the defense tried again, their arguments fell apart like wet paper. The HOA's expert surveyor fumbled under cross-examination, admitting he'd been hired only 3 weeks earlier and hadn't verified the coordinates personally. Colin pressed the advantage, pinning each contradiction until the poor man looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Then Colin dropped the bomb, "Your Honor. During discovery, we obtained an internal HOA email chain between President Voss and her late husband's firm Voss Land and Title. In it, Mrs. Voss instructs her surveyor to adjust parcel 27B line by 10 feet south to align with proposed Birch Avenue." Leah shot to her feet. "Objection, privilege material." "Overruled," said the judge flatly. "These are HOA communications, not personal correspondence." Colin projected the email onto the courtroom monitor. The words glowed in white against black. "Make the adjustment quietly. No one lives there anymore, and the county won't notice. N. Voss, 2006. The The sound that escaped Nora was something between a gasp and a hiss. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "Your Honor, that email was taken out of context," she stammered. We were simply updating GIS data." Griggs' gavel hit the block once. "Enough." She turned to me. "Mr. Ward, do you have any further evidence to submit?" I opened my binder one last time and held up a photograph, one of the granite cornerstones by the lake, still bearing my uncle's carved initials JW, and a 1951 date etched beneath moss. "This," I said quietly, "is the only map that never lied." The judge recessed for 20 minutes to deliberate. The room buzzed with whispers, but I sat still, staring out the narrow window at a patch of sky so pale it looked like old paper. Colin leaned over. "You've already won," he whispered. "She's just writing the punctuation." When the judge returned, she wasted no time. After reviewing all evidence, she said the court finds that Mr. Ward's property, as established by the 1951 plat and corroborated by independent survey, lies fully within his lawful boundaries. The Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association has in fact encroached upon a portion of said property by means of an unapproved boundary adjustment in 2006. The HOA's enforcement actions against Mr. HOA's Ward are hereby declared invalid. Nora slumped in her chair. Judge Griggs continued, her tone now edged with steel. "Furthermore, the court directs the county prosecutor to investigate potential fraudulent filings connected to the subdivision's original boundary submission. A separate civil inquiry will determine whether the association owes restitution for damages and legal costs incurred by the plaintiff." The gavel fell. Bang. The sound felt like thunder breaking across the lake. Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed microphones, flashing like dragonflies. "Mr. Ward, is it true the HOA built their street on your property? Will you sue the residents?" I ignored them, walking toward my truck. Colin followed, chuckling under his breath. "You just became a folk hero for every HOA-hating American." "God help me," I muttered. As we reached the parking lot, a familiar voice called from behind. Nora. Her heels clicked across the pavement like tiny hammers. "You've ruined everything," she spat. "Do you have any idea what this will do to property values?" I turned, met her glare. "Property values recover, Mrs. Voss. Integrity doesn't." For a moment she looked human, tired, small, and terrified. Then she straightened her blazer and stalked off without another word. Colin exhaled. "She'll probably resign by the weekend." "She should start packing now," I said. The following days unfolded like aftershocks. The HOA's website went dark. Residents held emergency meetings, some furious, others confused. The county survey team arrived to remark every parcel. Bright orange flags dotted the street like a field of surrender. One afternoon, as I was splitting wood, Elliot, the neighbor from house number 18, pulled up in his pickup. He stepped out holding a six-pack like an olive branch. "Thought you might want one," he said awkwardly. "Guess I owe you an apology." I smiled. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't let anyone tell you where your land ends without checking the damn map first." He laughed, scratched his head. "Fair point." When he left, the lake was turning gold under the sunset. For the first time in months, no one was watching me, no one was whispering. Just the sound of water against the dock and a distant loon crying like punctuation to the story. That night I lit a fire and opened my uncle's old whiskey. I poured a glass, raised it toward the lake, and said softly, "You were right, old man. Truth doesn't shout, it outlasts." And somewhere deep in that silence I could almost hear him laughing. The battle wasn't over. There would be negotiations, compensation, easement talks. But the war, the real war, over power and fear, had already been won. Because sometimes all it takes to collapse an empire of arrogance is one stubborn man with a binder, a boundary stone, and the audacity to say no. News travels fast when pride collapses. Within 48 hours of Judge Griggs's ruling, the entire county was buzzing. The local radio ran hourly updates under the headline, "HOA built on private land." The reporter's tone dripped with disbelief, half comedy, half tragedy. I didn't have to tune in. The story reached me in the form of strangers honking support as they drove past my cabin. Some even slowed down just to shout, "You showed 'em, Ward." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm that had only paused to catch its breath. The HOA board imploded. 2 members resigned the same day, citing health reasons. Nora Voss didn't show up for the emergency meeting called by the remaining members. By sunset, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board, effective immediately. The position of HOA president is vacant pending internal review. Lakeside Meadows Board. It was printed on plain white paper, no logo, no crest, no self-importance. That alone was poetic justice. But beneath the schadenfreude, panic was spreading. Homeowners were realizing the implications. Half a dozen houses, a paved road, and multiple utility lines crossed onto land that didn't legally belong to them. Their mortgages, their deeds, their entire sense of security suddenly uncertain. I watched it unfold like an architect watching a skyscraper lean the wrong way. Guilt and vindication wrestled in my chest. I hadn't set out to ruin anyone. I just wanted to be left alone. But truth doesn't stop at fairness. It keeps rolling until everything false is flattened. Colin called me early the next morning. "Brace yourself," he said. The prosecutor's office opened a preliminary investigation into fraudulent filings. They subpoenaed Voss land and title. "That'll make some people sweat," I muttered. "More than sweat," he said. "If they prove deliberate alteration of county plats, that's a felony. Could carry prison time." I stared out at the lake, the water perfectly still. So she might actually face charges, possibly. But don't get too comfortable. The HOA's new interim council filed a motion to appeal the ruling, more of a face-saving move than anything. Still, it'll drag out. "Let them drag," I said. "I've got time." And I did. Time, patience, and a fortress of evidence thicker than their bylaws. 3 days later, a county engineer named Marla Pierce visited my property with a small survey crew. They were there to re-establish the official lines now that the court had voided the HOA's altered map. "Feels strange," she said, planting a bright orange stake beside the old granite cornerstone. "I've marked hundreds of boundaries, but never one that changed the course of an entire neighborhood. Blame the people who paved before they measured," I replied. She smiled. "You know, technically this stretch of Birch Avenue now counts as your private drive. Until the county renegotiates right-of-way access, anyone using it is technically trespassing. Even the mailman." "Even the mailman," she said, laughing. "You could build a toll booth and charge them a quarter." The idea amused me more than it should have. When they finished, the orange stakes lined the road like exclamation marks. They glowed under the afternoon sun, a new grammar of truth written across asphalt. That evening, I walked into Lakeside Grocery, the same store where whispers once chased me down the aisles. This time, silence met me, not hostile, just uncertain. A few heads nodded. One woman, the same one who'd avoided my eyes for months, approached slowly. "Mr. Ward," she said. I wanted to say sorry for believing them. "You don't owe me that," I said gently. "You were scared. They fed you fear. That's what people like Nora do best." She nodded, eyes shiny. "What's going to happen to our houses?" "That depends on how honest the county wants to be," I said. "But I'll work with them. I'm not here to destroy anyone." When I left the store, I noticed a group of residents clustered around a car in the parking lot, arguing in hushed tones. The spell of HOA obedience was breaking, and in its place came confusion, the first step toward independence. The next week brought the formal settlement conference, a civil negotiation ordered by the court to determine compensation and property adjustments. It was held in a sterile county office that smelled like old coffee and stress. Colin sat beside me at the long table. Across from us were the HOA's interim board 3 residents, who looked like they'd aged a decade in 7 days, and a substitute lawyer who seemed painfully aware he'd inherited a sinking ship. He began with a weary sigh. "Mr. Ward, the association recognizes the validity of your title and wishes to reach an equitable solution. The residents affected by the encroachment are anxious to stabilize their property lines." Colin leaned forward. "We're open to discussion. But let's be clear, any resolution must include reimbursement for legal expenses, survey costs, and damages resulting from months of harassment." I added, "And the HOA will formally cede any claim of jurisdiction over my parcel permanently." The lawyer nodded, taking notes. "Understood. As for the encroaching properties, the board proposes a perpetual easement arrangement compensated at fair market value to preserve access to Birch Avenue." Colin smirked. Fair market value? Mr. Ward's land just became the most valuable real estate in the subdivision. The room went still. I watched the board members exchange panicked looks. After hours of negotiation, we settled on a figure that made their accountant's hand shake when he wrote it down enough to cover my legal fees, the Glenwood survey, the property tax increase they'd caused, and then some. I didn't want to bleed them dry. I just wanted closure that hurt enough to teach memory. Before we left the interim chair, a man named Paul Richter looked at me across the table. "Mr. Ward," he said quietly, "some of us didn't know what Nora was doing. We just signed what she gave us." "I believe you," I said. "But next time someone hands you a pen, ask, who's holding the map? When the final agreement was signed 2 weeks later, I received the first payment via cashier's check and an official letter from the county. Notice of Jurisdiction Removal Parcel 27B, formerly listed under Lakeside Meadows HOA, is hereby recognized as non-subject to HOA authority. All related liens, fines, and encumbrances are void. It was the single most beautiful paragraph I'd ever read. The following morning, a moving truck rolled up to the Voss residence. Through the trees, I watched Nora step out in jeans and sunglasses, her expression carved from stone. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Losing power is humiliation enough without witnesses. As she drove past my cabin, one last time I gave a slow nod, not out of triumph, but acknowledgement. Every empire ends somewhere, and this one ended on a dirt road by a lake it tried to own. Weeks passed. Winter crept across Granite Lake, icing its surface in silence. The bright survey stakes remained frozen in place like little monuments to the truth. I spent my mornings chopping wood, evenings reading by the fire. The phone stopped ringing, the mailbox filled with nothing but bills and junk mail, the boring peace I'd once prayed for. Then one afternoon, Colin called again. Just heard from the prosecutor. They're pressing charges against Voss Land and title fraudulent filing, falsification of public records. Nora's been subpoenaed. I exhaled slowly. So it's finally over. He chuckled. Almost. But you, my friend, are officially the man who beat the HOA. Let's hope I stay the only one, I said. After we hung up, I walked down to the dock. The lake had frozen over the sunset, trapped beneath the ice like amber. I stood there for a long time, listening to the faint creak of shifting water beneath solid cold. It struck me that real boundaries, aren't about fences or rules. They're about balance. The earth holds its shape because everything respects its edge. It's only people who forget that. I turned toward the road, the one that used to be Birch Avenue, now legally mine. The county would rename it soon, but for now the street sign still stood. I took a can of paint, climbed the ladder, and added 3 small words beneath the name: by permission only. When I stepped back, I laughed a quiet, tired laugh that tasted like closure. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destruction, it's ownership. And the land finally was mine again, on paper, in law, and in peace. Winter in Granite Lake doesn't arrive quietly. It rolls down from the north like an ancient god, cold, absolute, and cleansing. By December, the trees stood naked, the lake frozen into a sheet of glass, and the world that once buzzed with HOA meetings and whispers had fallen silent. The community's chatter died with the leaves. What remained was stillness, honest, heavy-earned. I woke each morning to frost on the windows and the comforting creak of the old cedar beams that had outlasted lies, lawsuits, and arrogance. The binder, the one that had once been my shield, sat on a shelf now gathering dust beside a half-empty bottle of bourbon. I no longer needed it. The fight was over. But victory is never simple. It lingers in odd ways, in headlines, in rumors, in the way neighbors hesitate before speaking your name. People still slowed their cars when they passed my cabin, unsure whether to wave or hide. I couldn't blame them. The story had grown bigger than me, bigger than the lake. I'd become something between legend and warning. One evening, while splitting wood, I saw headlights stop at the end of my drive. Out stepped Paul Richter, the new HOA chair, though calling it an HOA now was generous. It was a skeleton of an organization, 3 members, and a broken printer. "Evening, Paul," I called out. "You here to fine me for unapproved snowflakes?" He chuckled, holding up his hands. "Peace offering." He held out an envelope. "Final paperwork from the county. The easement documents have been processed. Everything's official." I wiped my hands on my flannel and opened it. Inside was the signed deed of easement. Lakeside Meadows granted perpetual access to Birch Avenue, now officially Ward Drive, in exchange for annual maintenance fees and compensation. My compensation. "Looks good," I said. "They finally admit they're driving through my land." "They do," he said quietly. "And they're grateful you didn't push harder." I looked at him. "You mean grateful I didn't evict them?" He nodded. "Something like that." I smiled. "Tell them gratitude's cheaper than rent." He laughed, but behind it was real relief. Before he left, he hesitated at his truck door. "You know, Ethan, you could have destroyed us, taken everything. Why stop here?" I leaned on the axe handle. "Because vengeance is only satisfying when it teaches something. What good is burning the village if all you get is ashes?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe you should have been president." "God forbid," I said, and waved him off. After he left, I stood in the quiet and looked at the road, my road. The new county sign gleamed silver in the moonlight. Ward Drive, private easement. I'd already installed a modest wooden gate at the entrance, not locked, just symbolic, a reminder. Beside it, a small sign carved by hand read, Welcome to Ward Drive, by permission only. It wasn't anger anymore. It was punctuation. In spring, when the snow melted and the lake thawed, the community began to recover. The new board replaced the old bylaws with something simple: no more aesthetic policing, no more arbitrary fines, no more dictating the shade of someone's porch light. The neighborhood that once worshipped order discovered peace through humility. They even invited me to a community barbecue. At first, I laughed at the idea. "You want the guy who beat the HOA in court to eat ribs with the HOA?" I asked Paul over the phone. "Exactly," he said. "It's time to bury the hatchet, preferably not in anyone's property line." So I went. The gathering took place on the very lawn where Nora Voss once held her infamous compliance picnics, those sterile events where neighbors were judged for grass height while pretending to smile. Now kids chased each other across uneven lawns, the smell of grilled corn filled the air, and no one wore matching shirts. When I arrived, the conversations dimmed for a moment, then resumed. Paul handed me a beer. "Glad you came," he said. "People need to see the story has an ending." "An ending, sure," I said, "but not a moral." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, there's a moral. You proved one man can stop a machine." I took a long sip and looked out at the crowd. The machine was never that strong. It just depended on everyone being too polite to question it. Across the lawn, I saw Elliot, the neighbor who'd once avoided me grilling burgers. When our eyes met, he waved awkwardly. I waved back, progressed one gesture at a time. Later that night, as the bonfire burned low, an older woman approached me. She wore a heavy coat and a nervous expression. "Mr. Ward," she said softly, "I used to live next door to Nora. She's moved out of state. I heard they're selling the house." I nodded. "That was expected. She lost a lot," the woman said. "Her husband's company, her reputation. She lost the illusion of power," I said gently. "That's not a tragedy, it's an education." The woman smiled faintly. "Maybe this place needed that." I looked around the laughter, the imperfect lawns, the smell of wood smoke. Maybe we all did. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. I mended fences, replaced the old shutters, and started sketching again, something I hadn't done since before retirement. The first drawing I finished was of the cabin itself framed against the lake, sturdy and unapologetic. I pinned it above the fireplace beside the 1951 plat map that started it all. Every so often I still received letters from journalists, from other homeowners across the country who'd seen the news. People trapped in HOA nightmares wrote to thank me, to ask advice, to share their own battles. I replied to every single one, sometimes just with a line: "Document everything. Truth needs proof." One day a reporter called asking if I'd agree to a documentary interview. I declined politely. "The story's not about me," I told her. "It's about boundaries and how easy it is to forget why we draw them." Summer returned. The lake glittered again, alive with color and sound. Kids swam, dogs barked, and for the first time in years, Birch Knoll Ward Drive felt like part of the earth again instead of a spreadsheet. I spent my evenings on the porch, bourbon in hand, watching the sun sink behind the pines. Every sunset looked like forgiveness. Sometimes I thought of Nora not with anger but curiosity. I wondered if she ever realized what she'd built wasn't control but fear. Maybe somewhere in whatever cul-de-sac she moved to, she'd learned to plant something instead of policing it. The irony still made me smile. She tried to move my cabin 20 feet east, and instead the world moved her 20 miles away. One night, as fireflies rose from the grass and the frogs began their evening chorus, I felt something rare, peace that didn't need permission. I walked to the road, touched the cool metal of the gate, and whispered, "We're even." The land said nothing, but it didn't need to. It had already chosen its side. Life has a strange sense of humor. Sometimes the people who try hardest to control everything end up losing the only thing that matters: respect. Boundaries, whether on a map or in our hearts, exist to protect, not to dominate. When we cross them out of greed or ego, the land remembers, the truth remembers, and eventually justice does too. So if you ever find yourself cornered by arrogance, don't shout, document. Don't fight with noise, fight with facts. And when victory comes, wear it gently. The loudest revenge is quiet ownership. And to everyone watching this story, where are your boundaries? Comment below with your city, your time, and tell me, have you ever stood your ground when everyone said to move? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because around here, every HOA story ends with one truth: you can't fence off justice.